test it to make sure it's working.
We are live, coming to you from Chicago Theological Seminary. My name is Malcolm Himshoot.
I'm Stephen Boyd.
We're representatives of the United Church of Christ team called MESA, the Ministerial Excellence Support and Authorization Team. Stephen and I are together doing a circuit of the seminaries this year and next year to make sure that everyone who happens to be a student, a UCC student at one of the 6 UCC seminaries, gets to hear from, if they want to hear from, the MESA team. What MESA observes across the landscape of ministry, what we're working to support together with the conferences and associations across the United Church of Christ, and how that touches individual lives of people who are called into doing great things for the church in the world. So this is our first experience doing this as a live stream. So Stephen and I are super excited about this. And we have about 45 minutes today to introduce some themes and trends in the vocation of ministry. We thought we would do that a bit by introducing you to MESA and to our stories, and then go from there. If you want more information from the MESA team, Stephen, would you tell them the web address they can go to?
You can go to www.ucc.org/ministers, and that will give you a lot of an opportunity to get in and see many of the resources that we'll be kind of talking about a little bit today and in other opportunities along the way. So are we showing that? Did you want to show the organizational slide?
Any way the camera can show what's up there? The old-fashioned 360 turn, 180 turn. That's us. Coming to you with a presentation on life in ministry. That's the team we represent. Ministerial Excellence, Support and Authorization, covering the arc of authorized ministry from our colleague Renee Jackson, preparing people for ministry as the Minister for Ministerial Formation, for MIDS, for Members in Discernment. We have another teammate who works with ministers in local churches, Elizabeth Dilley. Stephen Boyd works primarily with chaplains and ministers in specialized settings. And I handle ministerial transitions, which leads us to Search and Call. Those are some of the things MESA works on together with the conferences and associations across the United Church of Christ. Stephen, say a handful of things about yourself.
So the job that I'm working right now, the way I represent MESA is I work with a lot of committees on ministry and MIDS, working on 3-, 4-, and 5-way covenants. And those have a lot to do with ordainable calls and ministerial calls for authorization. A lot of those calls are into specialized ministry settings, which are considered now to be ministerial settings that are beyond the local church. So we're looking at chaplaincy settings. We're looking at other settings that a lot of individuals are starting to create new and exciting ways to do ministry that take us beyond the local church. I work with institutional chaplaincy, which has a lot to do with the certification, board certification for individuals that are serving in civilian hospitals, but also working with the federal government chaplaincies for the VA, for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and for military chaplains for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Entrepreneurial ministers is something that is new that we've been starting to work with, especially with committees on ministry, to help them understand and gain a deeper appreciation for some of these more different and challenging kinds of ministerial settings that take us, again, outside of the local church. And like I said, then I serve as the chaplain endorser for the federal government and work with the committees on ministry to get the paperwork done to submit to the the federal government agencies. That down below, registered nurse, local church pastor, and active duty military chaplain. Those were all different settings of ministry where I did work, and we'll go into that in a little bit when we start having a dialogue between Malcolm and myself.
Thanks, Stephen.
You're welcome.
I wonder if you all can hear us. I know some of you are watching live, some of you are watching the recorded version, but I do wonder if we can just test the audio somehow or get some indication. Are they hearing us out there? We did. Good. All right, so I'll just keep talking then to describe to you my portfolio with the Mesa team in Cleveland, but traveling around the country. I work in the background on the infrastructure for cross-conference search and call. That's how pastors and churches find one another in the United Church of Christ. When they come into that relationship, we call it a three-way covenant. The call between a pastor, congregation also involves the association as a third party, as a partner in that covenant. So we call pastoral service in a local church a three-way covenant. So primarily looking with UCC congregations, make use of the infrastructure that I develop. Looking at trends in ministry, such as bivocational ministry. Looking at resourcing the professional networks of those who serve as intentional interim ministers. Those are some of the things that my portfolio contains. In my life experience, I've been a local church pastor, been and am an educator, an activist, a writer, guest preacher. So those are some of the things we can relate to students on today. We have office hours today and tomorrow at Chicago Theological Seminary, and we'll cover some of these things about our stories that relate to trends in ministry over time here today. So we can shift the visual back to the two of us now. And who wants to interview who first as we
Why
start?
don't I interview you first? Okay, Malcolm. So why don't you give me a little bit of a background as to what has moved you and taken you on the various journeys that you've been through in terms of being UCC clergy.
All right. The time span that my journey in ministry covers is from about 2000 to present. Somebody who went to grad school, seminary, found myself serving in various internships. Those settings became apprenticeships, really, a mentorship to a licensed minister who'd been for 40 years serving the same parish called the Denver Inner City Parish. And so as I moved deeper into that experience and my home church recognized that I might want to become a member in discernment, that eventually culminated in ordination. And it was ordination to a four-way covenant, serving in and on behalf of the United Church of Christ in this inner city parish nonprofit organization.
So those internships, how long did they last on an average? Those leading up to?
I guess 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah. And after, there were some other things that were ministry that weren't happening, that were happening at the same time, but not at the same place.
Okay.
So the United Church of Christ at that time was doing a transgender education video. It could have been a video on VHS. I'm that old. But instead, when it came out, they put it on DVD, and I became involved in education work around trans issues and gender diversity as an out transgender person.
Okay.
So they released that movie, Call Me Malcolm, right after, the year after I was ordained. And that ended up changing the path and the landscape for me ever since, because the search and call experience became one that was filled with barriers, as local churches' search committees didn't want to interview somebody who was trans at that time. So from 2005 to a lot of years went by of fruitless search and call experiences. But I was picked up for an associate pastor, a grant-funded associate pastor position for a couple of those years. I was picked up for sabbatical supply a couple of times, and for a new ministry start. I had a grant to do for 1 year to do a new church start.
So you kind of pieced these all together.
Yeah, I did. I did a lot of piecing together while I was also still writing, and from time to time teaching. I would teach community courses. I would teach some courses at seminary. So I described my ministry as portfolio ministry for the longest time. And I did not put in my portfolio description doing diapers, but I was doing a lot of diapers for 4 years when I didn't have full-time employment. I was the trailing spouse, and my partner, she did have full-time employment for a bit. So we were making it work as best we could as a clergy couple. So there were lots of different experiences in there. One of my 4-way covenants, because I had a new 4-way covenant every time I switched to a new ministry setting. Right. Same home church kept sponsoring me for all of these things, and those relationships were very profound. But another one of the 4-way covenants I had was with the ONA Coalition, at that time the Coalition for LGBT Concerns. And I was the nationwide ONA coordinator for a bit. And that also fits as a nonprofit organization. But the church could see clearly that's also a ministry setting. So I guess somewhere in that montage of experiences, I was also polity teaching. And that's what led up to the work with Mesa, which brings us to where we got to know each other working with Mesa.
So, and where were you teaching polity?
I taught at the ILIF School of Theology in Denver.
How long did you do that?
2 different courses over 2 different years. Yeah.
Have you seen a difference in some of the students you taught in those polity classes with what we're seeing today?
That's a great question, because looking back compared to now, what are we seeing in the types of preparation that people are doing who imagine going into ministry? I think ever since 2000, since I went into seminary, people were talking about bivocational ministry. Be prepared for not getting that message and simultaneously preparing themselves for 2 careers. Then we're practically doing that 20 years ago. But a lot of folks thought maybe they should at some point. And most of us should. Even if we're in ministry now, we should think about how we finish, how we do that.
How we do that? How we make it to retirement? Yes.
Retirement is a good thing. At some point in my first 20 years of ministry, I had to learn how to think about that. And the pension boards for the UCC, they follow these trends in ministry too. They know that a lot of people are going into ministry that don't have a nest egg, independent wealth, may not even have a lot of financial background to know about the things that employers used to provide. If you're in ministry, even if you're employed, you kind of have to think like a self-employed person to make sure you're hitting savings goals for retirement, to figure out how to do your own taxes, to do a lot of those things. So the pension boards these days have started providing more financial education for ministers in the UCC.
We need to make sure that our mids and everybody know about that and get that information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, if I'm looking back over 2 decades, how many decades do you want to cop to?
So ministry for me was a second occupation. I was in hospital work for about 14 years, and somewhere along the line received that tap on the shoulder. I was very active in a local church. In fact, it was the local church that Roberta, my wife, grew up in. And so we were having a great time raising a family and everything else, and life was great. And then everything got upset, and I started seminary. At the same time, I was also coming out of the Vietnam era, so I had a military obligation that I was fulfilling at the same time, and that kind of ended as seminary took off. And I graduated from PSR in 1985. I was ordained in 1985. And took a small church down in Southern California that was a project church, and it had 10 members, and the conference was paying the salary, and we worked with that church for about 4.5 years, grew it into a church of 130, and it became self-sufficient. And then I moved on to another church, and stayed there for about 6.5 years, and then moved to my third church. And one of the things we were reflecting when we were at the Eden conversation, which I thought was very interesting, was one of the first two experiences that I had were not the most wonderful experiences. They had some good moments, obviously, but local church ministry is very difficult. And one of the things that I found in those two experiences, the congregation said they wanted to grow, and then as soon as they started to grow, they said, no, but not like that. It was, and all the dynamics were changing. New people were coming in and giving their opinions, and life was changing and morphing and expanding. And so that was a real eye opener. Those were two very painful situations. And I went to the third congregation in 1995 and basically said, if you don't want to change and grow, then please don't hire me, because it had a lot of potential. It was a great congregation and a lot of wisdom and good church people in it. And it was just, it had suffered kind of a downtrend. And sure enough, the church grew and blossomed and did real well. I was there for 13 and a half years. And I was also there during the time when I was mobilized as a Army chaplain in 2005, 2006. I went over to the Middle East. And you talk about bivocational, and I definitely was bivocational. I was an Army Reserve chaplain, and I was also serving a local church. And we do have a number of reservists and National Guard chaplains that are serving local churches now. And it works quite to their advantage to have those incomes and be able to provide for their families. I think the one thing that's very obvious nowadays is that our reservists and National Guard chaplains are eligible for TRICARE insurance, health insurance through the military, which is only a fraction of what the UCC insurance is, and their families are eligible for that to carry them through. So it was an interesting 24 years in the local church. After that, I left local church in 2008 and went to the Pentagon and worked at the Pentagon for 3 years, working with seminarians who were interested in becoming chaplains. And it was seminarians from all denominations, not just the United Church of Christ, but all denominations. We had about 450 chaplain candidates that we dealt with to continue their progress, monitor their academics and things like that. And then in 2011, when that ended, my predecessor, John Gunlack, retired and applied for this position with Mesa, became the endorser.
Starting with the most recent first, where your story led up to was working with military chaplaincy, endorsed chaplains in the military. What trends is the military seeing with people going into chaplaincy? What trends are you seeing?
I'm seeing a number of, and the problem, I think, one of the hurdles that as a mainline denomination we have is that quite often individuals, it takes a while for us to get through the education and through the experience and everything else. And quite often our people who apply have aged out already. One of the things that I'm trying to do is get people to start thinking about that as soon as possible. What we're seeing, because I am seeing a lot of local church ministers that are saying, like you're saying, I need to be bivocational. Maybe I need to pick up something in the military also. So I've worked with a lot of local church ministers who have said, okay, I'd like to become a reserve chaplain, or I'd like to become a National Guard chaplain while I'm still serving the local church. Though I think the one thing that is awakening, it's very slow, but is awakening, is that a number of our members in discernment and our clergy realize that the military needs more progressive chaplains, men and women who can openly serve the LGBT community and be able to be open about and authentic about the ministry that they're doing. Whereas with a number of the endorsed chaplains nowadays, they cannot openly do counseling or same-sex marriages or anything like that because of the theology of their denomination.
Are you saying there's more need than ever
More need than
for
ever.
ministry to people in uniform?
Yes, yes.
Do you ever get asked questions that by people, members in discernment? Is that a question on the street? Asking, well, the United Church of Christ is a just peace denomination. How does that go together with,
that's
with
a real.
service and military chaplaincy?
Yeah, I walked that fine line for 24 years. Yeah, I ask that question every now and then. It's a and I ask that question when I interview men and women who are going into the military chaplaincy, how they're going to be able to answer that question. I think it's an important question. And for me, it was always, and I just read a paper by one of the people who was applying that I've been working with for a year or so, and he put it exactly the same way, that this has come to him, this question of how do you balance the Just Peace Church with the fact that you're becoming a part of the military. And it was, it's basically we're talking about a group of people who are called to serve this nation. Whether we agree with the politicians or not is really immaterial at that point. What we're really called to do is to do ministry to those individuals who have very deep and very important pastoral needs and spiritual needs, while they do a very difficult kind of job. When I was overseas for the whole year, did a lot of counseling for separation, and actually some spiritual counseling as well. But those people in the variety of settings that they serve in our nation's military, they sacrifice a lot, and
Very difficult situations.
and they need good pastoral leadership.
And on the other side of active duty, or on the other side of their term of service, when they're veterans,
Yes.
what trends are you seeing in those who seek to give spiritual care, pastoral care?
Some very
veterans?
good individuals. The difficulty that we're finding there is that the VA healthcare system is so competitive because it's so well. It's a great salary package and a great benefit package, and everybody's going for it. And as a result, the positions for staff chaplains in the VA are incredibly competitive. Most of our VA health centers won't entertain anybody with less than 4 or 5 units of CPE to even start thinking about being interviewed. So it's very, very competitive.
What else besides VA chaplaincy is being done to meet the enormous need of the mental wellness and the suicide
veterans,
issues that are in the headlines with
I
the
think
spiritual? You've worked on this term in other settings, the moral injury.
the moral injury, yeah, and the United Church of Christ has inserted itself with the Disciples of Christ and a number of other denominations to start working. We work with the Soul Repair, which is
Soul repair.
Soul Repair, and
Let those words be a prayer.
yes, Soul Repair, and being sensitive to what's going on in local communities. I've done some work with Zachary Moon here at Chicago Theological Seminary, and we've done some things in rethinking how local congregations can do Veterans Day instead of just having an obligatory everybody stand up and sit down kind of acknowledgement during worship service, to do some other good kind of memorialization during that worship service to make it a little bit more meaningful. So it's slow. Our local church, for example, we're starting to take dinners up to the Fisher House, which is it's kind of like a Ronald McDonald House for patients that are in the VA. It's a Fisher House, and the families can stay there while their loved ones are in the hospital. And our church once a month is taking meals up there to socialize with them and to serve meals to the families and kind of give them some conversation and a break from being in the hospital with their loved ones. So there's various ways for us to reach out into the communities and do sensitive work to that.
Which your story there about your local church leads back to where you started, your call story. It started in the church you were a member of, your home church, which was your wife's from birth.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about what role that home church plays in UCC experience, UCC polity, and all our various policies down through to date? What is it about the home church?
The home church was just, your home church supported you through the whole.
They did. The whole way. They moved a little far away from you.
Oh, yeah, you're
off the screen.
What about the whole idea of your home church staying with you through each of those different?
Yeah.
What
this was Washington Park, UCC.
Did they discern with you at each move? Did you have a group that worked with you?
Well, let's see. I was in my 20s and 30s, and there was just a lot of life happening. So that there was change was not always carefully predetermined change. It was change. But as far as setting out with intention to do something at any given place that I was asked to serve, there was a discernment committee leading up to ordination.
Okay.
It was a local church discernment committee. There was 3 or 4 folks who knew me, and they would know me over those years that I spent as a member in discernment. And they asked me good questions. We got together for meals, maybe not more than once or twice a year, but that was a really significant role for them to play. And eventually that church has to say to the association, we think this person's ready to be ordained. We support that. And these were the individuals that said that in my case. 2 out of 4 are dead now. So I remember them as the saints who've gone on. But anyway, now can I just be real with you? In many of those subsequent years when there was a 4-way covenant to be signed, nobody at the local church knew who exactly should sign it. And they had some different committee structures, right, through the years. And it was usually a teaching point with new people, whoever the new people were, that I would bring to them this covenant, and they would say, now, what is this about? Why do we need to take this on and sign this piece of paper? We're your local church. You worship with us and you preach once a year and whatever. We know that. Who else needs to know that? And that would be the teaching point where I would explain, well, the association would like to know that, and the employer would like to know that. If I represent myself as a Christian minister, but I'm the only one who thinks I'm a Christian minister, then they're not getting what they think they are getting with a rev in front of my name. Right. So there's a deep integrity that this shows, that my association holds my credentials, and that my home church holds my belonging. And then you probably want to know, I would tell them, you probably want to know about this place that I'm serving in your name. Right. So I would teach then about the inner city parish. I would teach about the Olympic Coalition, or I would teach about the seminary. I would teach about the nonprofit community organizing group. So it was paperwork, but it provided an opportunity for us to have a deeper knowledge.
Well, I think you bring up a good point there when we start talking about, and there's a very intentional difference that is made in the new MOM about call agreements and about the covenants. And the call agreements, whether it's to a local church or even to a chaplaincy setting or another ministerial setting, that sets out the everything about the remuneration and all the salary and housing and everything else. Whereas the covenant is more the relational part. How are the partners going to work with one another and support one another? I think one of the important parts when we start looking at the 4-way covenant, especially, is the responsibility of the local church, especially if you're looking at a 4-way covenant where somebody is serving beyond the local church. I depend a lot on my local church, just knowing it's there. I serve communion once in a while. I may preach once in a while, but I travel so much that I'm not there to worship with them a lot. But it's quite often Roberta will bring it up and say, Stephen's traveling this week. Make sure you keep him in your prayers or something like that. And I think that relational part is just more foundational to make sure that everybody is watching out for the whole setting. The minister, the people who are being ministered to, the whole wholeness of it. So
You mentioned MOM, Stephen, so I wanted to say what MOM stands for. Anyone watching? MOM, Manual on Ministry. This is a guiding or a foundational document that's shared across all the associations of the UCC nationwide. We have about 173 associations who are making decisions on who will represent the UCC in authorized ministry and how to keep those covenants over time. So Manual on Ministry kind of spells it out, the kind of things we've been talking about, 3-way covenant, 4-way covenant. If you want to know more about that, you look, and so does the committee, you look in MOM and read in the Manual on Ministry about how that goes. We have more and more resources in the new version of Manual on Ministry in the section 3 to be really practical. Here's a template for a 4-way covenant. Here's a template for a 3-way covenant. And MOM really responds through the decades. There's a different version every 15 years or so. It responds to the trends that are going on in the landscape as we know it, and in the life of the church as we know it. So there may have been a time before either of us when it was solely expected that a person would go into ministry. That meant being a pastor of one church full time for 40 years or so, and maybe with one church once and then retire, and that it would be an upward pay scale the whole time and be very linear. And that might have been the expectation for a previous version of MOM. But recently, we've noticed, life is much more complex than that.
Much.
And the Manual on Ministry guides decision making. That's much more nuanced in people's lives and call to ministry. But an enduring piece is the integrity of that local church connection.
Right. Well, and the two foundational parts really are the local church connection and the covenant, the whole. But you bring up a good point, which is just a very short story. But I was ordained in 1985, and the basis of my ordination was really my salary package, and that I was going to go to a church full time.
So to answer the question, yes or no to ordination, they looked at your
they looked at what I was getting paid. Yes.
Letter.
Yes, my letter of call, so to speak. Yeah, back then. And what was interesting was around the same time, a woman was being called to a half-time chaplaincy in a prison with all the half-time benefits and everything all very well laid out and everything else, but they did not ordain to that position.
Wow. That puts it really starkly, the kind of structural sexism. And we have the same thing, structural racism, structural heterosexism.
Right. And just the fact it was not a full-time position as well. Whereas now, there's a lot more imagination.
And that's one thing you'll talk about in your workshop tomorrow when it gets to ordainable calls.
Right.
And what does the new Manual on Ministry say about that?
And what it allows for, and what we encourage the community on ministry to do as well.
Yeah, more and more associations have gone away from using those criteria that you mentioned, the 1985 criteria, and they're looking at other criteria.
Yes.
Is the call covenantal? Is it? Is there mutual commitment? And what's the third one? Covenantal. Needs of the church.
Needs of the church.
And mutual commitment. And that's really to draw us back and the practices that we learned from Jesus in equipping the body of the saints.
Right.
And what is it all about? What are the needs of the church and how do we serve that in the 21st century? And your whole story, Stephen, about how you were both a pastor and a chaplain in the reserves at the same time, that also shows that it's kind of mythological if we still have the conception that somebody's either a pastor or they're a chaplain. Actually, some people do both, and actually some people do them both at the same time.
They do. And that's, but I think one of the things that we're seeing also now is that individuals are starting to sense I'm more of a chaplain than I would be a local church pastor. And the ones that I have who are in the National Guard and the reserves, they balance it. And I remember what I did to balance it as well. But I enjoyed being a local church minister. It was great. It was just, but once a month I got to go out and get dirty, and go out and camp with the with the soldiers and do all that kind of stuff. And it was a change of environment. And I had to also call on a whole different gift and talent set to work with that congregation as opposed to my the congregation I had back at the local church. It was a whole different gift set. And some people now are recognizing as they go through seminary, those are the gifts and talents that they have that serve them best, that would not necessarily serve them all that well, maybe in a local church setting. And so we're seeing more and more saying, I want to be a hospital chaplain. Or they get into CPE and realize the depth and the different kind of ministry that's there, and it really inspires them to do that kind of ministry.
And it can change through time.
Oh, it does change through time. I think that's one of the things that we both brought up kind of in our group that we were talking about with Eden, was just the whole. I try to, when I start working with individuals, I try to say, try to envision yourself where you are now, but realize it may change. I look back 35 years and go, would I have ever been where I am now? No, I thought I was going to be at a local church for 50 years and retire out.
Ministry is a journey in both of our lives.
It
And
has been.
everybody I know has had different surprises come, and they seek the Spirit in those surprises, and also different inspirations. And then they go and they pursue that, because it's a creative journey. It's also a sacramental journey. And so if you think about, I'm going to use this skill set in my whole life and put it on my resume to read this way. But, it goes back to some of those foundational symbols that we were left, the chalice and the stole for washing with the water from the basin, the feet of people around the table. So that stole, that chalice, and the bread itself, those things transcend certain categories for career or workplace or job, and really they're going to inform, those sacrament pieces are going to inform a number of different fields of work.
And I'm finding that that is exciting. That like the whole idea that can transcend. You start talking to seminarians who are finding those elements in totally new and different places, and it's very exciting. It's very exciting. I think it gives the committees of ministry pause, because they're challenged to think outside the box. But when you start talking to the seminarians, you can, well, just with a little tweak here, I can see that being ordainable. We can do that. Let me talk to your committee on ministry. But yeah, it's and trying to get the whole denomination excited about this, I think, is where we're finding ourselves now.
Yeah, and what questions the committee on ministry gets to ask now.
Right.
Not just, is it this or is it that? Either we're thinking it's more like, if we're going to entrust baptism and communion into these hands, what do we need to see in this person before we know that these things that we're entrusting could show up here, could show up in a farm church, in a street proclamation, in a liturgical global worldwide festival, and it could show up in a lot of places. What is it we need to see before we go ahead and put our trust in these hands? And that's where the marks come in. Right. And Mesa talks about the marks a lot for our team.
Right.
Why don't you have the last word, Stephen, by saying what the marks are?
What are the marks? The marks are so dear and near to us. I think one of the things that we find the most challenging about the marks is that they are asking the Committee on Ministry to really get to know their member in discernment, and have them work with those questions and work with those various gauges and questions that will give new insight to the committee on where this person is. We've kind of worked ourselves away from the academic checkoff list and that kind of thing, and tried to bring it more into where people have more of a conversation. We can really work to understand them and to hear where their theology is, to hear how they express their theology, what is meaningful to them, and how they can do that. I know that through Mesa we've done a lot of work on helping the committees and helping the seminarians on using the marks and using our other resources. We have the discernment travelogue and the journaling, the journey, a couple of these here.
If they could see that.
Yeah.
This one is called Journaling the Journey. It takes you through the marks of faithful and effective authorized ministers. with space for doodling and answering narrative questions and getting prompts and inspiration.
And then this is the travelogue, the sermon travelogue, just helping committees on ministry to ask the right questions and to give everybody an opportunity to have that conversation at a deeper level. And when I start interviewing for my military chaplains and understanding that they are working with men and women at very, very difficult points and sometimes very tragic moments in their lives, I need to know how they're able to do theology on the spur of the moment, to be able to talk to people and to really reveal themselves to the person that they're working with. So these, I think, the committees on ministry are starting to feel better about using the marks. We've done a lot of work within the manual on ministry to help give some guidelines and some helps in section 3. There'll be assessment guides to help them with that. And so there's more and more materials to help both the seminarians and the committees in using those marks and helping the conversation move along.
Thanks for joining us for this part of the conversation. If you are a member in discernment currently, or if you're thinking about becoming a member in discernment, if you might enter the search and call process at some point, or if you might have a 4-way covenant at some point, or if you might serve on a committee on ministry and make these decisions about others at some point, we're glad that you've had that you've shared a snippet of time with us. And if you're a CTS student, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks.